The Miami Grand Prix was utter McLaren domination, with Oscar Piastri leading home Lando Norris in a 1-2 by many seconds. However, I think this undersells the competitiveness of the weekend and how close McLaren did come to, I think, losing this overall Grand Prix and the sprint race win. Overall, the sprint and the main race, I think, were better than I thought they would be, where overtaking was possible. I really don't like the Miami Grand Prix layout. I'll rephrase that. I hate Sector 3 where they go under the overpass. I think it ruins the entire flow of the circuit, but it was better than I expected the weekend to go, with overtaking being possible. Both Antonelli and Verstappen took poles in the sprint and the main race, respectively, highlighting the McLaren drivers' inability to really get the most out of the cars in qualifying trim. However, Antonelli's sprint unraveled very quickly at turn 1 when Oscar Piastri took the inside and, using the racing rules, forced Antonelli off, and Norris, with the help of the safety car, was able to actually overtake Piastri off the track. Using the safety car, he stayed out longer and was able to get the win, followed home by a slightly annoyed and frustrated Piastri. Of course, there were more incidents in the sprint race, but I want to mainly focus this on the main race. Overall, though, the rain made the sprint race more interesting than I thought it would be, and I think added an interesting variable, a pit stop, into a sprint race where we usually don't see any pit stops whatsoever. Verstappen once again delivered to take an amazing pole position. This guy always manages to get the most out of the car, which not many drivers on the grid are able to do, so congrats to Max. He absolutely delivered on that pole position lap. He was put under pressure by Norris immediately into turn 1 here. However, he leveraged the racing rules perfectly once again, like Piastri did on the sprint race, in order to force Norris wide and keep his spot into turn 1, which was completely legal by Verstappen. I get why Norris was annoyed, however, he should have just backed out and gone into second place. Instead, he tried to keep it pinned around the outside and he went wide and ultimately lost spots to his teammate Piastri, as well as the Mercedes of Kimi Antonelli. That didn't matter much though, as both McLarens quickly got past the Mercedes drivers and started hunting down Verstappen, who put up a very staunch defense of his first and second place. Piastri had many attempts to try and get past Verstappen. He was quick enough to get alongside into the braking zone, but he was never quick enough to get past Verstappen before they got to the braking zone, which meant that Verstappen was always able to cover the inside, and he was never ever going to let Piastri go around the outside of him. It was only when he managed to get an extremely good run down into turn 1 where he was able to force Verstappen to lock up, go deep into turn 1, and he was able to execute a magnificent switchback through the turn 1-2 complex in order to take the lead. And from then on, Piastri just drove off into the distance. Norris similarly took a very long time to get past Verstappen, and there was a bit more argy-bargy between the two. And he was clearly unhappy with the way that Verstappen raced him in the post-race interviews. However, Verstappen once again did nothing wrong. He was just using the racing rules to his advantage. It was only after an intense amount of squabbling, I think, Verstappen realised it was best for him just to let Norris go and to run his own race at this stage, which he eventually did. There was a stage where he just let Norris through on the inside, didn't bother defending, and Verstappen just decided it was best to run his own race, which I think at that stage was probably the right decision. However, by this time, they were already 10 seconds behind Piastri, who had checked out in P1. From that point on, the McLarens were basically untouchable, and they both just drove off and finished 30 seconds ahead of the rest of the pack. Norris was able to close in on Piastri, cutting the gap to around 3 or 4 seconds, but I think Piastri had this race under control. If Norris does reckon, though, if there were a couple more laps, he would have maybe been able to close in on Piastri, but Piastri was probably just holding back some pace. But overall, Piastri, a great drive from him. He'll be extremely happy. He was able to deliver from a lower grid spot, which I think if Norris had kept P2 through the turns 1-2 complex, he would have won this race easily, and Piastri would be looking at a smaller gap than what he has currently in the Drivers' Championship, but he executed well, which is what you want to see. He's arguably been the most consistent driver so far behind Max Verstappen, so he'll be extremely happy, and Norris, again, will be kicking himself for that small mistake he made at turn 1 on the opening lap, which ended up costing him this race win. Russell got himself another podium as he was able to use the VSC to jump both Antonelli and Max Verstappen. It was a very under-the-radar great drive from Russell as he was able to fend off a hard-charging Verstappen who just didn't quite have the pace to get back past Russell. So Verstappen ultimately ended the race in P4, which he'll be a bit disappointed with, but I don't think that car was much quicker than P3. And Antonelli, on the other hand, actually dropped another place to the Williams of Alex Albon, who came home in P5, Antonelli P6. What a drive from Alex Albon. He's just got the most out of that Williams. He'll be extremely happy with this race weekend. And Carlos Sainz as well. Even though he wasn't quite on the same pace as Alex Albon, he was still delivered extremely well, and both Williams bagged points this weekend. So they'll be happy with the drivers themselves as well as the overall pace of the car. Ferrari team orders were once again a point of deliberation amongst fans, commentators, drivers, and the team itself. And I really just think you have to put the blame on Ferrari here for not being strong enough. Team orders only come around because, in my opinion, teams aren't strong enough to really just go out and say what needs to be done. They let Lewis Hamilton get on the radio. They let Charles Leclerc get on the radio, and they weren't proactive about the situation. I think they should have switched them earlier, and then they probably should have switched them back earlier. As it was clear the driver in front was unable to pull away just because the driver behind was getting that DRS dosage and just using that to stay within range. I also think Hamilton probably burnt up his tyres a little bit, but I'd just like to see Ferrari be more proactive about this situation and take the matter into their own hands rather than letting it get into the hands of their drivers. But the Ferrari pace this weekend was nothing to really talk about. Leclerc crashed on the way to the grid for the sprint race in torrential conditions, not his fault. His car just aquaplaned. But in the race, they just didn't have pace. They were beaten by one of the Williamses, and the other Williams was chasing them down very hard and made a last lap dive bomb on Lewis Hamilton. I don't think either driver here really deserved a penalty. There was nothing really that came of the incident. Maybe if Hamilton had gone into the wall, I would have given Sainz a penalty. I'm not against a late move. He just wasn't next to Hamilton by the time they got to the apex of the corner, and just it was a bit awkward. But happy with no penalty given. But yeah, the Ferrari pace was dire. Williams were extremely quick, and they'll be disappointed, Ferrari at least, with how they were this weekend. And finally, Yuki Tsunoda rounds out the point-paying positions in P10. He'll be happy just to secure a point, but once again, nowhere near Max Verstappen, but he'll take a point at this stage. Liam Lawson and Jack Doohan had the other major incident of the race, turn 1, lap 1, which basically DNF'd them both, Doohan on the spot and Lawson a couple laps, or many laps into the race with side pod damage. Don't think anyone was at fault. Doohan had nowhere he could have gone. Maybe Lawson could have given more space, but Lawson was pincered on the outside. It's just unfortunate that it's kind of where they all met. And it might mean the end of Doohan's F1 career, as apparently, as the race quotes, he was informed after the race on the weekend that he will not be returning to the seat, which I think is very unfortunate. Doohan deserves more time. He showed great pace this weekend. The incident wasn't his fault. He's been inconsistent, so I can understand why they'd want to swap him out. But the pace is there. Give him more time. Give him to the summer break at least. Please, Alpine. And of course, Bortoleto and Behrman were the only other DNFs in this race, both due to mechanical issues. Overall, the race was one of the better Miami Grand Prix. I think I enjoyed it enough, and I'd give it a solid 7 out of 10. So let me know what you would rate the race down below out of 10. I still don't understand why they've contracted it to 2042 though. We've got a race at Texas, which I think is a great track. Coda, love it. We've got a race at Las Vegas, which I think is a similar type event to Miami, but the track is much better. And then we have this. And for me, 3 races in the US is too many. I think we should be going back to Europe for another race. I would love to go to a place such as, or not even Europe, Malaysia. I'd go to Sepang in a heartbeat if they offered it up. I'd also go to Mugello. I'd replace Imola with Mugello, which I'll touch on now actually below, because Imola is the next race we've got. It's the start of a triple header, and I don't really like the track at all. I'd much rather race at somewhere at Mugello. It's a cool track to drive and to see the cars flying through, but it doesn't provide very good racing at all, and I'd rather go to Monaco than Imola if we had to go to a track that doesn't provide good racing. I also think the track layout would actually be much better if we went back to its pre-1995 layout with the better safety equipment that we have. I think that longer straight would give a much more beneficial overtaking opportunity into Tosa, but that's never going to happen. But thank you very much for listening, guys. I hope you had a great day, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time after the Imola Grand Prix.